So, hiya Emma.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Yeah, no, thanks for inviting me.
Good. So obviously we've spoken. I know a bit about who you are and what you do. But I just want you to introduce yourself to everybody that's listening, um, so that they can find out a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Emma Arran. I've worked in social care for many years. I'm qualified as a social worker, but I've since graduating, I've always worked in the voluntary sector or in in a range of different roles, and then within education and training. I've also been involved with research. I've always had a really strong interest in supporting women and children. And a big part of that's been supporting women and children who've been exposed to domestic violence, who've experienced domestic violence.
So, how do you think that? What do you see from your side of it, from doing your research and what you've experienced personally from what you've seen is happening on the ground?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's just horrific. They say there's an epidemic in violence against women and children, and we have to name it. It's male violence against women and children,
Yeah,
and I think that the way services approach it, particularly social work, that's something that's always concerned me. So as a social work student, to me it just didn't make sense what we were doing. It was there would be mums experiencing the most horrendous things, but the social workers at best they'd say, well, mum's got to be the protective factor. At worst, they would just dismiss their experiences entirely. I
yeah,
feel that we're not anywhere near where we should be, and the whole mindset is wrong. I feel that as much as things have changed, say in the last century, things have changed in terms of the role of women, women's rights, how abuse within the home is now recognised, but really, attitudes that sort of that baseline misogyny is still there. And I think for me that was what led to my decision not to go and work for a local authority when I graduated. I did something entirely different. I set up a community interest company, and we're really focused in advocacy, so advocating for families and really helping them kind of access resources in the community.
yeah,
We were focused on that kind of perinatal phase because I think that's often a really challenging time in general. There could be really big issues around housing, around like helping people access support, but predominantly it's also a time when there's that escalation or the onset of domestic violence. So there was kind of two sides to it. We were supporting women that had experienced domestic violence, but also support around women who'd experienced human trafficking.
yeah,
So it was gender-based violence was often what people would experience, but in different contexts.
yeah. And how long have you been doing that?
So I did it for so I kind of worked in that kind of field for around 7 years. And I think like anyone, there's sort of like those challenges with funding.
Yeah,
So from there, I then kind of moved into education and training. After funding became difficult, but I think that kind of overall experience, I think yeah, I had some really amazing opportunities. I had the chance to do a research fellowship. I traveled to Australia, the US, to see what happened there, and I think there's similar things happening all around the world. Big issues around prejudice, so particularly if mums say like on a low income or like working class mums, there's often a lot of like combined prejudice, which really impacts their lived experience. So I was really keen to just look at ways of making women's voices heard and to look at the barriers they face, because often it's like so many things, like there's so many interrelating factors. So there, if a mum's experiencing abuse in the home and then tries to leave, there's so many barriers with housing, with accessing benefits. And so yeah, I had a really amazing
But
opportunity to
but
see
as but on
what
that,
was out there.
yeah, on that note, uh, my argument is, why is it down to them to be the ones to leave? Why is it down to is it down to them to be the ones that have to go through that additional trauma, when surely we should be protecting the women and children by keeping them in the environment that they know? I just don't get
Yeah,
it.
definitely.
I just don't get it.
Definitely, it's almost like women are like punished,
Yeah,
really. It feels like a kind
across
of
the board.
punishment.
Yeah,
Yeah, they lose everything. They're blamed for what's happened to them. Like, and that's what I found the most shocking. It's just that the attitudes just are still where, we haven't come as far as we think we have as a
yeah,
society. I
yeah.
think like some of the language that's used, and also to me some of the language that's used by professionals, it's completely out of
Abusive.
sync with where it should
It
be.
could be
Yeah, it
abusive.
is. I think sometimes what women experience, particularly what I found with social care, I was involved. So yeah, I've done various bits of research, both in the UK and overseas. But a project I did in the UK, I remember mums literally saying to me, "It's like the long arm of the abuser."
Yeah,
We leave, and then it's this secondary abuse.
yeah,
And this, in some ways, actually, in the home, it was kind of most of it just came from one person, or it was, the partner and their kind of immediate. It might be the partner's friends and family were part of that. But I think we're really failing mums and children with the way domestic abuse is being dealt with.
yeah,
And I think that there's some people that do an amazing job. I think I know some individual social workers, individual police that have that commitment.
yeah,
Like that's their personal incentive that's done that. There isn't the response from services is just still really out of touch with
yeah.
where it should be.
100%. I can 100% mirror exactly what you're saying. It's exactly what we see as well. Um, it's I set Resolute up because of my own experiences, of how my children were treated, and when initially social care first got involved, I can remember the first social worker that we had. She basically said I should pull myself together. You need to get it in your head, lady. You're not a victim anymore. You're a survivor. And I was just like, I was just a nervous wreck at this point, you know. Um, and I mean, this was 2018, and I want to say that I'm seeing positive changes, but that's not the case whatsoever. We seem to be seeing a pattern of, like you said, the onus and the shame is still on the mother. But then when it gets to a legal issue, we have 50% parental responsibility, but where is the responsibility of the father actually, the behaviours that he's portrayed, and the abuse that he's is dished out to the mother and child. I think I find it beyond belief that we're in 2024. It's like we're still in the dark ages with all of this. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
it,
I'm so sorry you experienced that, and it's to me, I just find it horrific that this is still the norm. That there's these archaic attitudes. There's I think there's a big disconnect in social care with what's taught and what's done. So I know a lot of people find it shocking that we're in social work, we're taught about anti-oppressive practice, but then in reality it's often the opposite. Like yeah, I think so much needs to be done. I
yeah,
think the whole mindset of domestic abuse needs to be absolutely looked at entirely differently, particularly in social work, but also in
yeah,
policing. I think, and too often it's just a failure right from the start. Like, so a mum will phone the police. The police will, often be quite dismissive, and therefore there's no evidence, and therefore social care say, well, there's no evidence, so we're not going to act. And I think those kind of attitudes in social work as well, I think, at best, it may be that they say the perpetrator has supervised contact for a short period of time, but then it becomes unsupervised, and it's horrific. I think the current system, it really isn't a system that supports victims of domestic violence. It often like adds to the trauma they experience.
100% it does. 100%. And also, I want to touch upon, um, the complaints procedure while you're actually enduring this. I put a
Hmm.
complaint in about a newly qualified social worker, a young social worker, and you know, the case that she was dealing with us, in my opinion, was too complex for her, and it wasn't fair for them to give her our case, and basically she was left to continue to make mistake and error after error after error, even though I raised the issues around, that her information wasn't correct. She just wasn't getting it at all, what was happening. She wasn't understanding, the emotional impact and trauma it were having on my children. Um, but yet her supervisor, her service manager, continued to let her keep making the mistakes instead of supporting her, and she should have been shadowed. 100% she should have been shadowed. And I'm not saying, as a newly qualified social worker, they've got to learn. Of course, they've got to learn. But why wasn't she supervised while she was dealing with that case? And the thing was that, as you'll know, that if you raise it as an official complaint, you can't pursue that complaint whilst you're in court proceedings. So while you can't pursue the complaint, the errors keep occurring, and those errors are presented in front of a judge in a Section 7 report, or whatever report it is that they're doing for that judge. That judge then deems that to be fact, and then
Absolutely,
and then that
it's
victim,
horrific.
yeah, and then that victim has to go in front of that judge and listen to all the errors, mistakes on top of what she's already endured from the abuse and the post separation abuse that's been enabled by the system. How can that be right where you can't raise concerns even down to the age and the names of my children were wrong? Simple
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
that is like unbelievable. That how can you be so involved in a family and not get the children's ages correct or the names correct? Um, and it seemed to be that once it got to a stage 2 complaint, it was a case of it was easier for the local authorities to blame that social worker, put all the blame onto her because it technically was covering their backsides, basically. Um,
Mhm.
and then they wonder why they've got social workers leaving left, right, and centre. They're not equipped properly. They're
Yeah,
not. They're not supported
mm,
properly, and they
yeah.
put so much more pressure, additional caseloads onto them that they can't cope with. Um, and that's just my example of my experience of what I went through. And I'm just one case of thousands. And I think that if there are any changes that are going to be made, they need to start listening to these. I wanted them at my final stage of my complaints procedure, which was ombudsman, where it was all upheld. You know, there were 13 complaints that were upheld, and all I got was we will learn from this. This was 18 months down the line. The damage had already been done. Um,
Mm,
have they learnt from it? No, because it is still
mm,
occurring. And what they don't realise is they are destroying families' lives by these errors. Um, and not only that, it's the resources of that complaint. I went through stage one, which were an internal investigation, which were a regurgitated letter of apology, which to me was not sufficient whatsoever. Stage two were external investigators, two of them I had. Um, Now, they worked on it for, I think it was 10 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks. How much did that cost? Then it went to a stage three complaint where I sat with the investigators, my advocate, and a panel of 8 ex-social workers. And the paperwork, the paperwork was like that. I had 380 pages of redacted paperwork from my subject request. Um, and I just think, do you know what? One simple, one simple solution to that. Address it right at the beginning. Arrange to sit down with myself, the social worker, and service manager, and actually listen to what I am saying. It seems to be that they are also stuck and focused on this rule book that seems to fit all, instead of looking at the reasons behind why. I was with a man that I had brought a child up on my own for 7 years with no concerns whatsoever. Never, ever, ever had any social care involvement. All my,
Mhm.
you know, there were no concerns. My child was flourishing, everything else. We've then got a situation where I've met this man that abused me in every single form, and my life just went from bad to worse, and I became alcohol dependent. Social care were on me like a ton of bricks. Um, a Section 7 report was done where these convictions came apparent. They came to light where I had no idea of these convictions till this report was done. Now, is it just me that thinks that does this not talk volumes where we should be having a little bit of common sense here? You know, these convictions stopped from the year he met me because he changed his focus. And these convictions were for
Mhm.
violence. One of the
Yeah.
convictions was for affray, which are threats to kill. And
Mhm.
does that not tell somebody with an ounce of common sense when I'm in the background saying he has done this to me? Why aren't you listening? He has done this to me. And I get a social worker coming in and speaking to me like I'm some sort of idiot that ain't got a clue about life or what's happening and dictated to me like I were a child myself, if you like. And in some respects, I felt very much like a child at that point because of the trauma. You know, I wasn't clued up on. I was still probably at that point needing that validation from somebody and somebody to tell me
Mhm.
that this has happened. We've got you. We're gonna look after you, and you're gonna be okay. That was quite the polar opposite of what actually happened. And like you said, they went on to, you know, enable that abuse to continue. Not only the social care, but also the family courts. But
Absolutely. I think
I
it's
do
so
believe,
horrific. I think the like social work's in crisis. I think I want to be the one to just put it out there. Social work is in absolute crisis at the moment. Children's social work is in crisis. I think we need to, but there isn't really a light shining on it because so many families impacted are silenced through they're told in any meetings we're told everything needs to be kept
Yeah,
confidential. At court they're told it's been kept confidential, so there's this mass crisis going on, but
in
it's very
secret.
much largely behind closed doors.
Yeah,
And it's odd because again, the sort of essence of social work is looking at power imbalances. It's meant to be about being a voice for those that are voiceless, and supporting people that might be experiencing trauma behind closed doors. It's meant to be yeah, but that's where it is conceptually. But in reality, it's the opposite. It's actually further silencing, further traumatizing. It's so far from where it should be, and I would say it's at the point. It's a human rights crisis because from that initial social work visit, there's multiple ways in which the rights, particularly rights of mothers, but also rights of children, are being lost through that
yeah,
process. It's important to recognize that sometimes it's different power dynamics. So sometimes men and fathers can be victims. Sometimes abuse occurs in same sex relationships, and
hmm
it can be families of any gender. I think it's important to recognize that, but equally to recognize that it's predominantly male violence against women and children in an overwhelming majority of cases. We can't enter this sort of fictitious debate that it's as likely to be male and women. It's not. It's predominantly male violence against women and children.
yeah,
And yeah, I think we need to be open about the fact that social work actions can re-traumatize families. I've witnessed social work actions which I would say are abusive. In fact, the way they deal with victims of abuse is another form of abuse. I
yeah,
think we need to name it, because the definition of abuse, it comes from that imbalance of power between two entities. And so if you look at that more broadly, I would say social work's getting to a point in some cases the way that the voices of mothers are overlooked, that would meet the definition of abuse. But tied into that, children's voices are often overlooked. I think there's now quite a broad public awareness of the way that if a woman reports, say, sexual assault with the police, it's often dismissed. The police have that kind of misogynistic attitude. Oh, maybe she's got some grudge against him. But what's not widely recognised is if a child reports for being abused, particularly within the family home, there tends to be a very prevalent attitude within policing, within social work. What if the mum's coerced them to do this? Too often, that seems to be the go-to attitude.
hmm
I think that's in part being influenced by the parental alienation narrative within the family courts, where that's been brought in as a legal strategy. There's no scientific basis behind that. It's a pseudoscience concept that was brought forward by a really questionable
yeah,
psychologist who promoted paedophilia. So that mindset's there, and also even go back through generations within social work. There's always been this narrative about promoting father's contact. Sadly, in some cases, it's become father's contact at all costs.
yes,
So
100%.
we have I've seen too many cases where the attitude has been that they haven't spoken particularly at length to a child, and or they've stopped a child from seeing an advocate, and the rationale for that is that, oh, mum's probably influenced them. It's not acceptable not listening to children. The idea that the mum must have coerced them, that's just come from the textbook of misogyny. There's no rational reason to do that.
Yeah, which is what happened.
But what you say about complaints is also really valid as well. It's really important to look at, there's this horrific abuse going on. Not only there's no public awareness, but actually raising complaints is almost it's very difficult to
Pointless.
do, particularly while things are ongoing.
It's pointless. It's pointless. It absolutely gets you nowhere. It's designed to
Mhm.
tire you out and make you go away because, believe me, it consumes you. That complaints process, whether it be police or social care, Family court, you don't stand much of a chance anyway, at all. Um, but that complaints procedure is designed to absolutely, if you thought you were traumatized before it, then believe you me, it should come with a massive, massive trigger warning because you are meant to relive everything through that complaints procedure. So
Mm.
the amount of complaints that don't even get put forward, the amount of voices that have never been heard because of this secrecy and these gagging orders, because they are told basically that they could be sent to prison. Now, if that's not bullying, then I don't know what is, because if you're enduring abuse already from a system and your ex-partner, and you're being told that you can't tell anybody or speak about it or access any kind of support to be able to speak openly about it. And then they wonder why, by the time women get to the family court arenas, their mental health is through the roof. They are blamed for taking prescription medication. My medical notes was actually read out in a courtroom. So my ex knew exactly that he had kind of, he was halfway to destroying me because I nearly died of my liver failure. Um, he knows that I've got cirrhosis of liver now, and his intention was 100% out to groom me with alcohol to the point where I was dependent on it. And that was read out in court. And the shame that I was already carrying at that time because of the alcoholism, and I still felt like I was still the one to be blamed. There was a lot of victim blaming going on, which is still the case for a lot of victims. I had hell of a lot of shame to carry, and then for, the actual place where you're meant to go to get any form of justice or any form of support actually totally ridiculed me. So for me, family court arenas are literally the nail in the coffin a lot of the time. They're the end of the process, and we need to be learning where we can get to prevention because there is no cure.
Mhm.
Let's face it, there is no cure to any of this system. It is just there to
Mhm.
destroy,
Mhm.
um, which is what is happening.
Definitely. And I think that thing about destroying people, I think we need to, I think it's so good you're doing this podcast because we need to just recognize this as happening. I've known mums, grandmothers, and it's like one mum said to me, it's like I'm slowly dying in front of you, and I was like, yeah, you're right, because
Yep,
she experienced really severe domestic violence. The dad hadn't had much involvement, although the mum had evidence she'd actively tried to promote involvement. It went to family court. There was a full transfer of residency. So it went from very erratic, minimal involvement to dad fully having full custody of the children, despite evidence of severe domestic violence and also abuse of the child as well. There was so much documented evidence. The judge just ruled, oh, mum must have manipulated professionals. There's a full transfer of residency. It's yeah, and then mum's fighting. It's almost a full-time job trying to fight.
yeah. Oh,
Another mum. It's really similar.
yeah,
It's horrific.
trying to
It's
fight
horrific,
it.
and I think it's
God, it's
yeah, it's so
horrific.
hard.
It's horrific. We've got mums that, because I do think it is really important that, I think this is the 16th episode of these podcasts that I've done, which are, there's a range of professionals that I've spoke to. Some with lived experience, some not. But I think it is so important that we get these out there, and it's important that we can talk about case studies without mentioning names because it's reality. This is happening. This is happening, and I think the normal general public are so unaware of this because unless they know somebody that, even when they know somebody that it's happened to, they still find it unbelievable. they still look at that situation and think, well, she must have done something. They don't just remove kids for
Yeah,
no
I think
reason,
so.
but they do. They
I think that
do.
is the idea. Yeah, I think we need to say that. I think,
Yeah.
I will be the one to say that, yeah, I've got that social work experience, and yet sadly, if a mum's been a victim of domestic violence, that is a very likely scenario that the children will be taken to the perpetrator. People will say, mum must there must be a reason. A reason will be given, but it's not necessarily an accurate reason. Um
They will
it's not necessarily a
nine
well-informed
times out of
reason.
10, Emma. They will use her mental health against her, and the
Hmm.
capacity to look after
Exactly.
her children because of her mental health. That
Hmm.
besides the fact that they've actually created 50% of her mental health deteriorating, because of their
Absolutely.
actions. It's designed almost to set them up to fail, and I'm sure you're the
Yeah.
same. I can finish
Hmm.
the end of the story. It's so transparent. I can read it like a book. What's going to happen? Because it is the
Yeah. Yeah.
same
Definitely.
cases, and I just find it. I just can't believe that we should be opening these courts up, and we should be exposing, um, what social work is actually doing to families. The reality of what it is doing to families. Families should be able to go for support social services, not to be terrorised by them.
Absolutely. Like I said, I know of a few social workers that offer an initiative, do a good job, but I think that there's just some horrific issues within social work, like we said about a new qualified social worker being given a really complex case. The fact people can't complain. I've known social workers say, if you complain, we'll use it against you. And then once things are passed, it's drawn out, it's traumatic. Sometimes people are led to believe that they're being listened to and taken seriously, only to then have like an even worse trauma to find out they weren't actually being taken seriously.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
horrendous. I've got a really unusual and but horrific experience. So I'd had a long career in social care, qualified as a social worker, run a community interest company, worked closely with local authority in that professional context. I'd even run training for local authority and been, we involved with them in various professional capacities. I was never employed by them, but I worked alongside them. Um, then when I moved into education and research, I did a little bit of volunteering alongside that. In that capacity, a child disclosed to me that they were being abused in the setting I was working in by a member of staff. I reported that, and to my horror, the police told me they wouldn't be investigating. I said, no, no, legally you have to. They said children's services will be in touch. To my horror, children's services got in touch with me to say, we are investigating whether you're delusional and pose a risk to others. And I was like, no, this can't be happening.
Oh my
But
God. Well, I can't.
it did.
Yeah, yeah. I can.
So it followed that same narrative. Although I barely knew the perpetrator. And in some ways, that's why I've been so passionate in recent years about speaking out.
Yeah,
Even, I was always like in that arena where I was involved in advocacy and campaigning, but now even more so. So it kind of where I'd done a lot around, supporting, women facing multiple social economic disadvantage, and it was advocacy in that sense. Now I'm actually no, it's across the spectrum. I have a social work background. I had no kind of wider social factors, but they still just came down heavily on
so
me.
basically,
Um,
they've targeted
yeah.
you, haven't they, for
Hmm.
speaking out and basically
Hmm.
whistleblowing.
Yeah, and it's sad in that you'd have thought social services would be the people that would want to safeguard and protect vulnerable children. Actually, social care were used to kind of silence and intimidate me into not speaking out. I mean, I continued to try and pursue this matter, but then they continued to actions against me. And they kept on saying, "Oh, it must be your mental health." And I'm like, I don't have mental health problems, but do a psychiatric assessment. Let's get that clarified. They actually said to me, "It doesn't matter whether you have mental health problems or not. Even if you don't, you will do by the time we finish review." That's what I was told. So that's, it shows how actually the system that's meant to protect is actually being used as a weapon by perpetrators.
Yeah.
Even in this case, a perpetrator who I barely know. It was terrifying that someone who I barely know, I lost almost everything
Yeah.
because, I got vandalism of a property I lived at. I moved to another property. I got harassment. I had to move again. When I said this to a social worker, she said, "Oh, you're probably hallucinating. It's probably all in your head."
Oh my
Which
God.
it wasn't, because at the time that's the thing. At the time, I was working in a role. I was working in a different statutory setting, so not the local authority, a different setting. I was running training for professionals. Part of the training I was running was about spotting signs of deteriorating mental health. I wouldn't be paid to do that job if they had any doubt that I was
No,
well.
it's because
They were, yeah,
it's because you have been brave enough to do the right thing and speak out. That and then they've targeted and tried to punish you best they can. Um,
yeah, yeah.
it's
And I was
disgraceful.
so fortunate it didn't get any further than it did. I had to spend a lot on legal representation. Justice is expensive. Like, justice costs about £300 an hour on average. I'd already lost everything, having been targeted after speaking out, and then it was very difficult to then. I got there eventually, but in terms of rebuilding my life, having to pay out those legal costs after having lost everything materially, it was horrific. I survived it, but it was, there was nothing about that. There was no aspect of that social work dynamic which was ever about providing support. There wasn't any support needs anyway. But it was all about interrogating me, intimidating me.
Yeah.
It was very degrading. It was odd as well because I got so much experience. And again, a newly qualified social worker was sent to see me. She was really out of her depth. I said, "Well, what's going to
This is
happen?"
criminal, and let's
It
face it,
is.
that is harassment
It was. Yeah.
by the
And
authorities.
yeah, definitely. And I think it's becoming increasingly common.
Yeah.
So if you look at things like, so in Manchester, it said that where child sexual abuse and exploitation was reported, many of those reporting ended up being arrested themselves. So like about 40% even got arrested. I'm not sure of exact statistics
We've
along
got
those lines, and
we've
many
got
many had
people at minute,
referrals.
Emma, getting arrested and locked up for social media posts, and then we've got
Exactly.
rapists that you're lucky if you even get a. You're so lucky if you even get a conviction. We should not be in an era where we're saying that you're lucky if you get a conviction for rape or assault. It's disgraceful. And the thing is, and I'm going to
Mm.
disclose this now because I'll tell you what, my blood is boiling at the moment because the local authorities have actually said that Resolute are an unsafe group. And the reason that they're trying to say that, and I've got it in black and white, is because of my social media posts and presence. Now, I don't name any particular social worker, I don't name any particular police force, and I don't name any particular local authorities. But they are spreading this around, this accusation of which they have got no evidence, and I can prove all the safeguarding referrals that we put in as an organisation that have not been picked up on. And this went in front of a family court judge to suggest that Resolute are an unsafe group purely because I am exposing the failings within this system. That is not right. The more
Mm-hmm.
professionals that come openly to speak about this, why are these things getting covered up? It's disgraceful. We've got professionals and organisations that are causing this terrorism, and it's wrong. It is so wrong.
It It's entirely wrong, and I think it's concerning how like referrals to social care are increasingly becoming weaponized. So it's in the media about how perpetrators will refer women to social care. Hypothetically, social care is meant to be about supporting people, but the fact it's being used by perpetrators in this way is concerning. It's done at an organisational level. I remember seeing in Nottingham where there's that maternity scandal. Some of those families had referrals to social care, um, seemingly done with the intent to scare and silence them.
Mm,
I think I think that I think social care is really a breaking point, and I think it's so far removed from where it should be. It should be about advocating for families. It should be a voice for the voiceless. It should be supporting and strengthening those that are vulnerable.
yeah,
And at the moment, it's almost the complete opposite, really. I think children's social care in particular, the light needs to be shined on them because again, it comes back to power dynamics and where there's an absolute imbalance of power. Even it's like citizens advice on their website say they recommend not challenging child protection because implies that families aren't acknowledging that the issue's there, but actually issues can be brought maliciously or in error. Like you say about reports, such a high prevalence of reports have information on them that are inaccurate,
yeah,
and then it kind of snowballs
yeah,
because a report with an inaccurate information shared with professionals, then professionals will make judgments based on that false
yeah,
information. And then it's like it becomes true because it's like, oh, well,
yeah.
this was said.
And
And it's like, no,
not
actually,
only that, it
um,
stays on their system. So I had a case
mhm.
quite recently where it kind of it mirrored to a certain extent what happened to me in 2018. But we will learn from it, and it'll not happen again. But yeah, it's happened again, and they put on this report that the mum was actually caught drink driving. This mother doesn't even drive. She hasn't even got a provisional driving license, and there is no report whatsoever, right? And I just think that how that is like life destroying stuff that is being put on
Mhm.
paperwork, and I just think this ain't just a slight mistake, is it? This is like
Yeah,
huge.
it's so unbelievably common. Yeah, this needs exposing so much more. Things like I've seen a report where the dad's got extensive criminal convictions, but it's written down as the mum. I've seen reports where a child's got indications of sexually transmitted infection, but it's actually where they've been abused by the father, but it's written down as the mum. I have seen reports where, yeah, sometimes it's just a slight change of words can be written so differently.
Yeah,
So even with me myself, someone that has been working in the field for years, that's advocated for families, that has done research around best practice of making voices heard. I couldn't make my voice heard within social care. It said on my report I reported threats made by the perpetrator, so say threats to break in. But on the report it said that he was breaking in, making that I'd reported he was breaking in, as if I was seeing something. That slight change in tense in that sentence gave it an entirely different meaning. This it's not rare, I think, and I think sadly there is no real mechanism to bring it to account.
no.
So I'm like I even paid for a solicitor to write to them. They still ignored it.
Yeah,
um
yeah, they will. They will
and
ignore it. Do you
it's
know why? Because
terrifying.
this is why I wanted to keep continuing with these podcasts and keep trying to keep ploughing at this because they won't listen. They will not listen unless it's exposed. And then they all scurry around because it's their reputation, but let's face it, their reputation is so crap because of the way that they are actually treating families. Instead of providing the support, they're destroying them. That unless we all stand together and get this out there like we should, you know, and not feel threatened that we are going to be targeted by doing that, because it is the right thing to do to stop this happening to others, you know, they will continue to work in this manner, and it is not acceptable. Not one of them will hold their hands up and say, "Yeah, we've made a massive mistake. We're held accountable to this. How are we going to change this to ensure this does not happen again?" And put it
Yeah.
there solid that it doesn't happen again. All it is a regurgitated letter that you will get sent out saying, "We are sorry, blah, 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 we've learnt from this." Believe you me, they are not learning from any of it, because it's still happening. Still happening.
Definitely. It's so sad. And I think back to when I first started training in social work, so about a decade ago, I remember being sat in a child protection meeting. I was sat with a mum beforehand, and she's like, they just go in and bully me. And she was right. It was like bullying what I was witnessing. As a student, I spoke up and I said, "Look, she's done nothing wrong.
Mm,
She's been a victim of abuse. She'd experienced domestic violence, and she'd experienced different things through childhood, abuse and neglect through childhood." The argument presented was like, "There's no way she's going to cope. She's experienced this trauma." And I was there as a student saying, "No, she's experienced trauma. We should be supporting her." What I said was dismissed. A few hours later in the next room, they were doing a supervised contact session, and they were very open about the fact that the dad had been abusive. So that gender imbalance was huge,
mm,
and also the attitude. Well, the damage is done. The pregnant young mum that hadn't even been given a chance. They were, but I think it just comes down to costing a lot of it. I
yeah.
think sadly doing the wrong thing is
But
often the,
surely,
the most cost effective.
but surely, right, and this is what needs to be come across, the prevention is better than the cure. And the thing is, there is no cure. It seems that in this country, choose what subject it is we're talking about. We wait while everything comes to crisis point and then go, "Oops, what we're going to do about it now?" And I want to just go back to these recent riots that's been happening around country, because do you know what? It surprised me. Well, it hasn't surprised me, because nothing does, to be quite honest with you, Emma. Nothing shocks me anymore. It's just the fact that, we've clamped down on these rioters, and miraculously we've got rooms in prisons, to put these people that's been rioting. Now, I don't for 1 minute condone any of it, any form of violence or whatsoever. But these riots have not just appeared overnight. This is been built up out of frustration. And I'm talking about the people that have tried to peacefully protest, they've done the petitions, they've tried to get the voices heard, but this has built up and built up and built up into sheer anger. And the thing is, there are so many mothers that have lost their children, and they have basically been left where there is nothing they can do about it. I've got a case at the moment where she has got a child in her care with no social care concerns. She's got two children at the other side of the country that are up for adoption. And this is because the perpetrators, two different dads, have both, one was under investigation, but one was actually charged with indecent images of children. Because the perpetrator has accused her of watching these images with him, which is the old Darvo thing. If I'm going down, you're coming
Mhm.
with me. They removed
Yeah,
they
yeah.
removed the children. Of course they did. And if it
Mhm.
had not been for the fact that Resolute had been in place for her, I have no shadow of a doubt that they would have removed that child that's in her care now at birth.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And
It's terrifying. It's so common, this kind of scenario, and I think particularly um just across the board. I think if mum's got so there'll be mums that have, say, one child, children living with her, other children where she has minimal or no direct contact at all. And it's, it's like, well, if mum's safe to look after one, two, three of her children, why is she not allowed contact with with the others? And often it will be like, mum's reported abuse in relation to one of the children. That's been dismissed. There's been a transfer of residency. It's odd because there's no kind of logic to it. It's
No.
like, is how come mum's safe to look after one child but not another? And there's cases where the child that is with her is maybe due to their age or their other vulnerabilities, they're actually a more vulnerable child than the child we're not allowed to see. There's no logic to it. There's no
But they're also
there's
breaching.
no
But they're
justice.
also breaching the children's human rights to have a relationship with their siblings.
Yeah, 100%.
They
It's
have
a broken
split these
system.
children up where they're going to grow up in. These kids are automatically going to grow up confused. Um, they're basically setting them up to fail. And not only did they use the perpetrators against her, they used her autism against her as well. You know, it's absolutely disgusting what they do.
Definitely. It's so common. Like literally anything and everything can be used against mums,
Yeah,
and it's wrong.
yeah.
And I think it's amazing you're doing the advocacy that you're doing. I've been involved with volunteering, like a charity near to me. It's called Hotline. I volunteer with them because, like, for me, that's, I think just we just need to just join together and
Absolutely.
advocate where we can, because
Absolutely.
so often
We need to
it'll
keep
get down the
but we
system.
need to keep encouraging brave people like yourself to speak about this, because we ain't just got one or two victims claiming the same scenario. We've got thousands. We have got thousands, and they are
Yeah.
trying to cover it up, and they are bullying it in a sense where they are threatening prison if they speak out about it. Um, and
Mhm.
I'm sorry, but it is not acceptable whatsoever. We need to stamp this out. Somebody with some power and authorization needs to be coming forward, standing up, and putting the foot down and putting an end to all this, because it is getting out of control, and they wonder why you know drug and alcohol rates have gone up, why suicide rates have gone up, why all the rates are going in this
Definitely.
direction. When a lot of this, I want to say at least 50% of these cases could be quite easily prevented. Quite easily.
Definitely. It feels like everything, it's in too many cases, everything gets worse. Once, like, there's that professional involvement, and then from court it gets worse still. It's almost, I've met women that have said it's almost like their perpetrator wanted them to be reported because it
Gives
actually,
them more control.
enabled them to
Yeah,
abuse further.
yeah, 100%, 100%, because they know that they're most victims have been told that they're going to be destroyed by them. They will destroy them, and that is what they set out to do. And where you've got a court of law disclosing a victim's medical information in front of a perpetrator, and you've got other professionals that are backing that abusive behaviour, it's disgraceful. And for me, it has to be a zero tolerance. Zero tolerance. The courts need opening up, and if you've got police that aren't implementing laws, hold them accountable. And I don't just mean by suspending them. I mean, we've got serious misconduct that's going off in a lot of police forces, and suspending them and a tap on wrist, they should lose the pensions, they should be sacked, they should be disgraced by it. Because how is anybody, not just victims of domestic abuse, but how can anybody have any respect for officers that are being, found to be guilty of these serious, serious crimes? It's disgraceful.
Absolutely. I think those two issues you've raised are really crucial. So around medical records, my experience is quite unusual in that I studied medicine before I went to social work. Not many social workers do that, and I worked in healthcare. So during the time I was a student, I worked in like healthcare support roles. So I've got an insight into healthcare, but that's very rare. So social workers wouldn't tend to have an insight into anything health related, anything medical. But I would say the misuse of medical records in children's social care is one of the biggest issues that there is, alongside the attitudes towards women and abuse in general. But so often, a report will heavily feature medical records taken out of context. So in the family court, it's people torn apart based on the medical records. But actually, from the very initial social care involvement, there'll be things going into reports, whether it's at a child in need or a child protection level, and it's just not accurate. It's not, and it's often based on that misogyny. So it can be anything from something quite so like, oh, she's got back problems, can she care for her children properly,
Yeah,
to things like birth trauma and pregnancy
yeah,
loss. She's experienced this, how will she cope? Actually, women are resilient, and these are things, women cope with so much. But and it tends to always be the mum's medical records, not the dad's. So a mum's medical records will be completely torn apart. Anything and everything in
yeah.
there can be
Yeah,
presented in
and
a negative
also
context.
and also her past as well. But when anything's mentioned about the perpetrator and abuse, it's historic. It's
Yeah,
historic.
yeah, definitely. So an example again, where I reported a paedophile who I barely know. The child, it was very graphic details. So he described scarring on the perpetrator, including in intimate parts of the perpetrator's body. I said, surely, if a perpetrator has these scars in this area of his body, there's some, at the very least, emotional harm and also sexual harm. Like a child shouldn't know this. No effort was ever made to cross reference with the perpetrator's medical records. In contrast, my medical records were really thoroughly gone through. But like, yeah, I said there's nothing particularly there. What are you looking at? They were like, well, you had birth complications, maybe you've not processed that. You experienced pregnancy loss, maybe. You said you have, but you can't prove it. It's at an early stage. And I was like, what's going on here? So I actually got a letter from one of the country's most senior midwives saying, this is appalling. What are you doing with her maternity records are being completely put out of place in this report. That was ignored, and a male police officer gave commentary on my medical records rather than the senior midwife. It's routine, it's abusive, and it needs to stop.
Yeah,
Um, and I think what was the second thing you said as well? I think the yeah, medical records, that needs to be looked at. And I think also, yeah, police process, that's what we were talking
yeah.
about. I think police process often isn't followed.
No,
I think I've seen that as a particular issue around child sexual abuse as well as domestic violence.
yeah,
So, children that have disclosed abuse should be given the opportunity to do an ABE interview, so Achieving Best Evidence interview. And that doesn't always happen because what police will say is the child needs to confirm that the crime, they need to confirm the details of the crime. But sometimes there's not support put in place to do that,
mm,
and it's a legal loophole in that there's things in place, what support needs to be done after the details of crime have been collected. But a lot of children will need support even confirming the details of the crime. So with this loophole, unless a police officer is particularly proactive of their own accord to support a child with that disclosure, there's cases where there's no further action, because a child struggled to confirm the basic details. But if that's applied widely, then it's basically saying abusing the most vulnerable children is decriminalized. because a child that's particularly young, a child that's been particularly threatened, a child that has communication difficulties, they're going to struggle with disclosure. Often they will be given support with that initial confirmation of the crime details, but not always. And so sometimes they won't even get to the AB interview. So I think that's one of the key pieces of legislation that needs to change, is that when there is a child sexual abuse disclosure, there needs to be support in place from the very first contact. And again, there's this argument of what if a child's been coerced? This is very rare. In the same way that false disclosures are rare across the board, a false disclosure from a child because they're being coerced, it's something that is so extraordinarily rare. And I think we need to we need to get the support in place from the start.
Yep.
Because I think sometimes they'll say, oh well, a child needs to talk to us themselves. A 5-year-old child's not going to phone the police and say someone's abused me. So most often there'll be someone speaking to police on the child's behalf. It might be a mother, it might be someone in a professional capacity. But sadly, there's cases where that's been turned around and the police have said, oh, well, it's not come from a child, it's come from you. Not only is there's no action in relation to addressing the perpetrator, so too often the mums or others that speak on the child's behalf can be heavily scrutinised.
Mm.
And rather than investigating the perpetrator, they then investigate the woman that's reported it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, when's it gonna ever change? When is this ever gonna stop for women and their children? Because for us as an organisation, I mean, we're all unpaid volunteers. Um, and we are trying to move forward in terms of we want to be able to make that difference as an organisation, as a service, which we do on a small level, but we want to be able to do that on a much larger scale because I do believe that, you know, Resolute was created because of the the gaps that I experience and see, and I can see through them now. And it's not just the gaps, it's the failings. We need to be able to go to seniors of organisations and authorities as an organisation itself and be able to raise these concerns on behalf of that victim before it even starts getting into a complaints procedure. Um, and surely that way, that would save so much money and resources by nipping it in the bud there when it's first reported than keep continuing this re-traumatisation. But we just literally have not got the funding. But we are building up. It is growing quite quickly and it will be successful. We will get it where it needs to be because we're all showing that we've all got that passion because it's happened to us. Um, and the very thought that it's still continuing to happen drives that passion, um, because it's absolutely soul destroying. 100% it is. I mean, it's been said to me where, do you think you're over your own traumas to be able to do this and you're still very angry about, and I'm like, of course I'm angry. I'm not angry. I dealt with all my issues a long, long time ago. I had to rebuild everything with suffering alcoholism and nearly dying from it. My whole world had to change. My routine, everything had to change. My mindset, everything. And I can say that I'm stronger than I've ever been in my life. Um, and I've also said that, you know, if I'm not interested in the sort of glory, the accreditation, the financial aspect of any of it. This is purely about getting the support and the justice for women that they deserve. And their children. Their children need to be able to grow up and not be in a situation where because bear in mind these kids are watching their mum be destroyed in this manner. You know, what is that teaching them? That is teaching my kids. Surely would 100%. I know for a fact they would sit here now and say that they do not trust police, they do not trust social care, and they don't trust the laws because it has ultimately failed to protect them. Um, and there's
Definitely,
thousands of kids
definitely.
growing up. There's thousands of kids growing up witnessing all of this. Um, and you know it it will eventually come quite obvious that as to what has happened to them. We've got kids at minute, haven't we, that have grown up that are speaking out about how the family court and the system have trapped them. Um,
Mm.
but it's the very fact that it still continues to happen. It's still continuing.
Yeah. Definitely. I often think what I often think's helpful is like looking at, say, the post office.
Yeah,
A lot of people would say no, that couldn't have possibly happened. That's maybe the
yeah,
attitude at the start.
yeah,
Then things
yeah.
changed, and now, everyone knows that it
Yeah,
did
yeah.
happen and it's
But how
real.
can we do that? So how can we?
Mhm.
Because this is the biggest national scandal ever, I want to say. I really do.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
really do want to say if you got all the victims, because as a single case, you are never ever going to be able to tackle any of them. It's just, you're never going to be able to do it. But as a collaborative group that come together peacefully as possible and raise these issues where ultimately, do you know what? It has happened to us. You're the reason that it's happened to us, but we're studying now to say that this must stop because the thought of it happening to others is absolutely soul destroying.
Definitely. And I think going back to the post office, there was that email from the head of the post office, and she said, when it first was coming out, she said, I need to prove that this can't happen. She said, she needs to be able to prove that accounts can't be accessed remotely. If someone was in any doubt about what's happening in social care, there's that question, who can prove that it isn't happening? What safeguards are there for families going through social care? Social care is meant to be all about safeguarding, but there isn't actually anything to safeguard families from bad practice, from those kind of abusive attitudes,
Mm?
um from cases where the concerns are dismissed. But there's no protective measures, there's no real scope to complain. So on that basis, that there isn't any really genuine argument that can dismiss people's voices, um because there are no safeguards in place. There isn't anything to stop it happening, so therefore it does. Again, it comes back to power dynamics. There's such an absolute imbalance of power. Families are effectively voiceless. So we really need to recognize their voices, because I think no one can really put forward a plausible argument to dismiss their experience.
Mm.
So I think this is really good, a really good first step. I think putting it out there in the media, because I
Yeah.
think until now there's been quite a silence from the media around this issue.
It's
There's a few good
Emma, but
journalists.
believe you me, it's coming. It's coming. We
Yeah.
had ITV did some filming with us yesterday.
Okay, that's good.
There's
Good. Good to hear.
yeah, and they're gonna be doing more work. There's also Channel 4, Sky News, um,
Hmm.
because I think that if it can be put out there in the media, but it has to be where this isn't let go. This cannot be let go because it's a national scandal, and it's just as though everybody seems to be just burying their heads in sand. And I want to be able to ask these professionals, how the hell do they sleep on a night? Some of them, you know, knowing that they're actually responsible. They're the reason why these children haven't got their mothers, or they're the reason why some of these children have been murdered or sexually abused.
Definitely, definitely. Like, I was speaking to like a mum and a grandma, and both of them are really struggling with their health. not just from the mental health and the psychological side of things, but their physical health is
Yeah, massive
deteriorating because of the
impact.
stress.
Yeah,
And the grandma said, I'm not sure if I'll see my grandchild again. And she's like, make sure you get this message out there. So for them and for everyone else, I just want to get this message out there because it's hell on earth
yeah,
what so
it
many are
is. It
experiencing.
is. It is. And you've just said that in a nutshell. It is. It's hell on earth. It really is. But do you know what? If this were happening to men in mass, this won't be continuing to happen, would it? Because it'd have been nipped in bud and there would have been uproar. But because we seem to
Yeah.
have been bullied into silence, you know, it's just constantly getting brushed under the carpet. And it's not happening anymore. It is not happening because I'll tell you what, and I will say this now, while ever I have got air in my body, this is not going to go away. So I think they all should start pricking their ears up because we are all collaborating together and we are all getting more angrier at the fact that they are not listening. Um, and they're not changing it. And these little changes that's coming into play, they're nowhere near enough, and they're not being adhered to. This domestic abuse bill may as well not even exist as far as you know police forces are concerned because they're just ignoring it. That most of them don't even know about it. So it's pointless. It needs to be where people are held accountable for these failings. They need regulating, and we all need transparency as to what's going off, because secrecy within them four walls of that family court is barbaric. What is happening? The very way, even just the very way that judges are speaking to victims is despicable. We're all human beings in all
Absolutely.
this, and there's absolutely no excuse for speaking to anybody the way that some victims are spoke to.
Definitely, definitely. I think there's just it is. We need to be like describing it as like human rights
Yeah,
abuse. Like it's
it's
so
it's
abusive.
one mass hate crime. That's what it is. It's one massive hate crime against women and children.
Definitely, and I'd be interested to see what happens. There's the talk about making violence against women like a terrorist offense, like
Oh, they've
crimes
been
against
Emma,
women.
Emma. I've got it in black and white from Home Office. They've been saying that since 2019. When I first raised it,
Yeah,
they told me
yeah,
that domestic abuse is as serious as terrorism. What a load of crap! Because at the end of the day, they're taking these riots as serious as terrorism, and look what's happened to all them that's been rioting. But yet, look what
mm,
happens to abusers. Jack shit, nothing.
yeah,
A
yeah,
tap on hand because
absolutely.
an order's been breached. Go and carry on doing what you're doing. 6 years for a conviction of rape, if you're lucky. 6 years where this man is walking about continuing to rape women or children. You know, it's wrong, and it needs outing. You're not telling me 2% conviction rate for rape, so a 98% of women lying. You know, as victims know that have been raped, it's not something that is disclosed easily. You might get the odd one that's made false allegations, but that is like a serious minority of what is actually going on here. And that is the biggest violation to a woman's body ever. And these men are allowed to just do it. And then even sentences don't even reflect on severity of what they've done. It's disgusting. Some of these rioters
Definitely.
have are
Yeah.
looking at nearly 10 years. Rapists aren't looking at that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well we need to recognize that when it's both abuse of women and the abuse of children, the majority don't speak out.
No.
So the fact that those that are brave enough to speak out, they think they must be lying. No, actually, they've gone through. It's so hard to actually get to the point where they are speaking out, and then to be, to have it thrown back at them is appalling, and it re-traumatizes even before that whole criminal justice process has started,
Mm,
being met with a view that we don't believe you,
mm.
And sometimes being explicitly told we don't believe you, that's re-traumatized someone before anything else has gone forward. So I feel we need to look at what happens when people come to the front door of disclosure. What happens when people first speak to police, when they first speak to social care. Perpetrators get legal representation when they first speak to police. Victims don't. Although there's legislation around the victims code, that's often not adhered to.
No.
It's absolute crisis. The state that the services are in at the moment, and we need to make the first step now. I guess, like
Yeah.
raising awareness of it
Yeah.
and doing what we can.
Yeah, and the thing is, we've got to put ourselves out there and be brave. We've got to be brave about this because ultimately we're at risk of getting either trolled or whatever. But ultimately, what we're talking about is fact. It is happening. Why keep sticking a plaster over it? It's time to rip that plaster off, and we all need to be having our voices heard now because enough is enough. I am absolutely sick to death of hearing the same failings, the same crap that they want to keep spewing out that they're going to learn from it. It's horrific what we see on a daily basis. It's horrific, and it's as though they do not care. They're not bothered. It's too easy for them to just say we'll learn from it, and that's not acceptable. Somebody across the board needs to be taking accountability for this because it's as though perpetrators can just do exactly what they want and there's no consequence whatsoever behind it. And they actually allow them to use that system to keep victimising, and it's just despicable, despicable. But
Absolutely.
I think that we've just got to keep going, Emma, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
could,
Let's keep
I
going.
could,
Let's keep speaking out.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let's
I
yeah.
could talk to you forever. But it comes back
Well,
to
let's keep it going. Let's keep that dialogue
absolutely,
going, and
absolutely. What I want to do is I
yeah,
want to do where we can have a podcast where there's a number of us in a discussion, in a debate, and keep ploughing away with that and keep chipping at this because I've had victims and women said to me, "Oh, we need to all go down and protest and blah blah blah." And ultimately, it might spark a little flicker, but it's not gonna get the same level of attention that it needs to have because it needs to be done on a much broader scale. Because ultimately it is, and not just a national scandal; it's global. You know, I've
absolutely, yeah.
interviewed people from Australia, and I've spoke to people all over, and it's not just the case in the UK. It's a global issue. But what I do think,
Definitely. I did a research fellowship and looking at like global context, and yeah, absolutely across the globe, the same's happening in so many different places.
yeah, and I think that it is just keep it in the public eye, keep it out there, keep going with it because it will eventually. It has got to. It's got to. But ultimately, I think if they started, we're opening these courts up. There is no explanation whatsoever why they can't open them up, other than they can still keep that child's identity protected. So why are they?
Yeah, definitely. And in social work, when we do our assignments at uni, you write case studies anonymized. If a first year social work student can do that, why can't that be done across the board, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, because I think what we might find is that family court has a totally different. There'll be different outcomes. Let's put it that way, and I think judges might think twice about how they actually speak to victims. I think opening them up is a massive, massive change and a massive step forward. But for me, I still go back to the fact that family court is, that is the end of it should be nearly the end of a victim's journey, and I do think that a lot could be prevented before it even gets to that scenario.
100%.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And from that very first social care contact, I think things like we need to
could
change
be
how
so
things are
different,
done from the
couldn't it?
start
Yeah,
and how people are treated and how things are approached. 100%.
yeah. Yeah. So I just want to finish up, but what I do want to say to everybody that is listening that, you know, that Resolute is not an unsafe group. We're not vigilantes. We purely do this because we know what it feels like to be at the receiving end of these authorities. And we do all the safeguarding referrals, and what is being suggested is quite the polar opposite, because I think what they might find is that it's not actually us that are failing to safeguard. Um, so I just wanted to get that out there, that we do the best that we can with limited resources. And the more people that follow us and share and keep raising, the profile, the more chance that we have as this as a collaboration. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to say that. But thank you so much, Emma, and we will be keeping in touch, 100%.
Amazing. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
All right, keep being you and keep being brave.
Thanks.
Speak soon.